Concerning news for parents with teenage girls. Depression, violence, and trauma all on the rise.
There's a number of concerning factors going on.
With the highest level seen in the past decade, our Mom Squad gets advice on what you can do to identify warning signs and help your child feel safe. That's today on Mom Squad. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Mom Squad. And this is a show where we talk about parenting and all of the issues that arise. Today, we're talking about a recent report that should concern all parents, especially if you have teenage girls. The CDC just came out with a report that found girls in the U.S. saw an increase of depression, violence, and trauma. The way they worded it is that girls are engulfed in sadness. Nearly 3 in 5 reported feeling persistent hopelessness. That is the highest that we've seen in a decade and twice the number compared to teenage boys. 25% say they made a suicide plan and 14% say they were forced to have sex. Reporter Jennifer Hoff from our station in KARE 11 in Minneapolis went in depth on what these numbers mean.
A new CDC report shows that teen girls especially are reporting high levels of sadness and sexual violence.
Our kids need our help now.
The survey has been conducted every other year for 3 decades and mimics the latest results from Treehouse, an organization creating safe spaces for teenagers at more than 40 sites across the country, including one in St. Louis Park.
I think often people don't really need you to fix their problems. They need you to sit in it with them for a little bit, and that's kind of what Treehouse gets to do.
Mandy Betlock is a longtime coach and Beulah's mentor for about 4 years.
She's so sweet. She's so down to earth.
Thanks, Beau.
You're just you, and I love you for you.
Love you too.
Treehouse also offers support groups that help serve 3,000 teens every year, nearly half of whom report experiencing serious bouts of hopelessness.
A lot of people shut out their feelings because there's not a lot of support. It's okay to let it go sometimes.
Hopelessness can look like bullying, self-harm, or isolation. In fact, that CDC report finds more than 40% of teens said they couldn't do regular activities. Betlock says there are other red flags like changes in eating or sleeping habits. She also says teens should have the tools to handle a crisis before it begins and to build strong relationships along the way.
But I think that we have to all own a piece of it, and we don't all have to own a big piece of it. Hope is abounding. It's out there, but sometimes we have to slow down to find it.
We also had a lot of questions when it came to the CDC survey. My colleague Danielle Wiggins and I sat down with Andrew DeFratis with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center to talk about what we can do as parents. Let's at least scratch the surface when it comes to this issue, because these numbers are concerning. And when you see this report, since you are somebody who is on the front lines, does this surprise you, and why do you think this is happening?
I wouldn't say surprised, no. In terms of why this is happening, I think like so many concerns in society right now, it often leads back to the COVID-19 pandemic. Years of social isolation for youth and teens has produced a number of problem behaviors, as well as just social issues to address, like you mentioned, depression, other mental health and behavioral health issues that we're still trying to tackle. And oftentimes, in terms of sexual violence, these are youth who have been in homes and haven't been able to have access to teachers who might notice something wrong and report that, or other social services that can capture that earlier. So there's a number of issues there, but it often, we believe, links back to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we are back in the classroom now. So you'd think, well, teachers are going to be able to see this, but how has the school structure changed since we have come back from the pandemic? And how is that leading to some other issues?
Well, I do think that the number of reports are increasing. It's not necessarily just the number of instances, but teachers do are better positioned to capture that, report that, and work with parents. But like I said, there's a number of concerning factors going on. It's almost, I don't want to say overwhelming on teachers, but there's a lot to make up for after the pandemic, and schools are still trying to figure out how to structure post-pandemic, among a bunch of other issues that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
I think I was reading through this report, or I don't think I know. I read through the report, and what was impactful to me is how it says nearly 1 in 3 seriously considered attempting suicide. That's sadness, but 1 in 5 experienced sexual violence in the past year. And so where are those assaults happening the most?
Well, there's no kind of universal rule. It could be at the home. It could be with what we know is that more often than not, the perpetrator is someone that the victim already knows. Oftentimes, especially when it's youth, it's someone the parents might already know, might already consider a trusted friend. So that's very close to one's social circle. I don't think it's necessarily happening. It's not the white van out in the community type of situation that you might see on TV. It's more closer to home, unfortunately.
And that even makes it more, scary for me. Right. I'm thinking of my 12-year-old, and I've been talking with her since she was a little girl about her private parts, about people shouldn't touch them, and here's only a doctor and mommy should be there, or if you don't feel comfortable, say something. But what are the conversations that people who have those young girls or even preteens and teens, what should we be asking our daughters? What should we be talking with them about? And how do we do it?
I'm going to applaud you, because that's essentially the answer, is to have those conversations early. And there's plenty of media stories, definitely, to get that conversation in a natural way started at home from a very trusted adult like a parent. That's exactly what we recommend to people, is to discuss the concepts of sex, sexual coercion, and assault early on in a trusted, safe environment, not to make it a joke, and to try to create a very trusting, calm environment. And that key piece is, if that conversation hasn't already started in the home, to say to your loved one, your child, that no matter what has happened before or whatever happens in the future, if someone ever does try to hurt you, you can come to me and you can speak to me, and I'll listen. And very importantly, I'll believe you.
Yes, the belief.
That's a good point.
That is a great point. As a mother of 3 girls, this is very terrifying to me, this entire report. And to kind of pony off of what Danielle was talking about, I feel like in our home, we try to create a good environment. We're trying to set our girls up for a trusting environment, feeling safe at home. But the mental health aspect of this report too, depression can happen even in a happy household. And I know mental health issues, bullying can happen at school where that takes a toll on somebody's overall well-being and happiness. So I'm assuming a lot of this goes hand in hand. So when you have somebody, a child who maybe has been going through other things outside of your home, they have those mental health issues. Does that set them up for being more at risk for being a victim in some way?
Well, overall, I want to definitely emphasize that sexual violence is never the survivor's fault. It is always the perpetrator's fault, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And sexual violence can occur to anyone. I know we're speaking about the numbers of teenage girls that have been impacted, but there are, of course, boys of all ages that have also been impacted. Overall, I think that mental health component actually is partially the result of our efforts to fight that stigma about understanding and talking about mental health. So I think that these numbers partially capture that youth responding to the youth risk survey have a better understanding of mental health, have a better understanding of what sexual violence is. There's less stigma and shame because we're talking about it more, that they can respond confidently, that they understand this, that they don't feel if they say, I've experienced depression or sadness in the last year, that the government is going to come find me or something like that. They feel like they can speak more authoritatively on that. So in terms of fighting that stigma and fighting that shame, we see that as a win. That's a positive, that people are more comfortable talking about that, because that's a step in the right direction of getting connected to services and getting connected to help, school-based, community-based, or otherwise.
Yeah, you kind of, not to derail a little bit, but you bring this up of the survey and people being open. Now, in another article I saw, a teen who was interviewed said, well, I think these numbers are lower because, or low in the survey, underestimated, because a lot of teens might be afraid to admit some of this stuff. Do you think that maybe that's a possibility too, that these numbers might actually even be higher?
I think it can go both ways. Especially, it depends on a lot of other variables. I know in the Cleveland area, we have a lot of awareness and fighting the stigma activities going on, but then there are a lot of parts of the country, especially in, say, rural Ohio, that are more underserved in that awareness, and that messaging about fighting stigma hasn't fully penetrated the schools. So that there's a lot of factors that can impact that. It could go either way.
I think you made a great point about, being aware, having the words now to say, because I remember I was 16 in high school, and a guidance counselor brought a number of the female leaders together before class or before school to meet. We called it REAL, it's reevaluating everyday attitudes of life. And there was a girl in our little group, and she started to speak about low self-esteem, and she described it, and I was sitting there quiet, and I was like, ding, 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 that's what I'm dealing with. And because that guidance counselor brought us all together, she didn't have to do that. That was on her own accord. That gave me the words to say, put the words to how I've been feeling mentally and why I was sad so often. And I was able to talk to her. So I love what you say about how nowadays that our youth have that language that they can say, I am sad, and at least we now can help. Because I just made an accomplishment, and that made me feel better. 2 weeks later, I'm sad again.
I think that links back to the YRBS's recommendations, actually, about all these numbers, is the solution, or at least a way to improve these numbers, is increased connectedness at schools. During the pandemic, the meeting over Zoom didn't allow as many, or it wasn't as natural a conversation for programs like that in schools. So even when those were successful, we kind of lost that health services safety net a little bit for a couple of years, and that's it could be one of the reasons why we're seeing more problematic behaviors now. But hopefully schools are getting back on track and are able to hold programs like that to provide information to youth, and that the schools can provide information to the teachers as well.
When it comes to services, I know that we have a lot of local services. What should people look for? I mean, just to get, maybe even to get that initial guidance on how do you have that conversation, what would you recommend?
Well, at clevelandrapecrisis.org, our website, we have some conversation starters for parents, and that information is available to absolutely anyone on the internet. It's not just information that's Cleveland specific, but clevelandrapecrisis.org. Again, it circles back to before there are any concerns, trying to set that relationship of trust with your child, and giving them the correct factual information before they start to hear pressure or misinformation from their peers, which, as we all know, when you're young, that is how it goes sometimes.
Can you give us some examples of those conversation starters? Because I'm a role player. I'll be my daughter. Tell me what you would, say.
I'm listening. I'm all ears on this one, because I don't think I have the ability to casually start that conversation with my kids.
It's really
not
just,
to put you on the spot or not.
You put Andrew on the spot this whole show.
No, it's no problem. Like I said, it starts with saying, if so long as if you've been hurt before, or if you are ever hurt, I am a trusted individual that you can come and speak to. It's like I said, get that conversation started early. There's no shortage of media opportunity. I mean, as I'm sure you both know, there's a number of oftentimes celebrities even who are involved in stories like this. So it's not outlandish to have a conversation like this in the home. And it's very important when talking to youth, young girls and young boys, that this is not a joke. You do not want to minimize sexual violence, of course. That's part of that fighting the shame around this.
Yeah, I think we focus too a lot about girls, but boys are also at risk, and they're a part of these numbers too. Do you see those numbers increasing locally with boys being victims?
If I remember the numbers correctly, the number of young boys reporting is comparable over the trend of the report.
I have it here, but I believe it went from, well, this is the feeling sad part, but the 21 to 29%, it's but the boys made like a slight gradual with the girls.
So we're seeing more reporting, but not as big of a leap.
It's kind of that same fighting the stigma, and I think there is very much a stigma in society around boys as victims of sexual violence as well, and there's a lot of work to be done there as well. Overall in life, I think about 1 in 5 women are likely to be the victim of sexual violence or sexual assault. The national figure is something like 1 in 72 boys or 1 in 72 men, but that number doesn't seem right to me, but it's what the information suggests, and I think we're all working towards capturing that information better.
You said it doesn't seem right to you. Why not?
1 in 72, that seems very low.
Okay.
Considering a lot of other factors, things like the YRBS, the number of individuals coming to us for services, the number of individuals who come to us to maybe support our cause of fighting sexual violence, but maybe haven't come to us for services specifically.
Now, I want to also, just before we start to wrap up, there is a group that we haven't touched upon yet that I think was very key in this finding too, that the number of LGBTQ youth, they also saw an increase in these same issues. And I know back when I was in high school, some kids were out, but not fully out. Like it just wasn't as open as it is today. And now we're seeing more kids very open about their sexuality and sexual orientation. Is that why, do you think that's why we're seeing an increase, or is this a population that we are going to just have to watch more carefully because just society is still, they might be targets in some societies and communities?
Yeah, in terms of monitoring those numbers and trying to make sure, and maybe trying different strategies so that community-based health services serves the LGBT community, there are a lot of, separate from the other stigmas we've talked about today, there are a lot of stigmas about receiving health services in the LGBT community. So it is an uphill battle of getting the therapy services, and sometimes even things like housing and health care. There's a number of issues standing in the way for that can stand in the way for LGBT individuals. So the fact that we're capturing these numbers better, I think, is informative. But there's still a lot of work to do in connecting members of the LGBT community to services.
Yeah.
I'm as a mother, I'm still thinking about it's the trusted adult. And she asked about looking for signs in children. Are there any signs in the adults that may be around your children, or is it just like spidey senses, and not to make a joke of it, but just like, oh, something doesn't seem right, or when you're looking about the perpetrator, is there something that we should, I think that just scares me right now, is that most of it happens with somebody that they already trust and know. As a mom, what should I be looking for towards those people who I think I can trust?
Well, I'm definitely going to defer to your spidey senses. I think that's good advice in any situation. If something just feels off about an individual, consider that and take that into consideration. And I wish there was kind of a universal, this individual looks like a perpetrator, I can't trust them. But usually not that easy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a perpetrator might be aware of that and try to take advantage of that and go above and beyond to be a trustable individual. So it's, like I said, it's not always that easy, but that's one of the reasons why prevention is working with your child to be aware of the threats and to have a trusting resource network in advance.
So if you feel something is off, and we call it the spidey sense, we'll call it the mommy sense today, what should a mother or father do?
Yeah, start that conversation with the youth and continue setting that relationship of trust, that's of serious trust, not to make light of the situation, and just remind them of what maybe services exist out there.
It is so important to realize when your teen is in an abusive relationship, whether it's physical or emotional. So here are just some of the warning signs you could see. They have a partner who is jealous, possessive, or puts them down regularly. They stop spending time with friends and family. They have unexpected bruises or marks. They're wearing baggy clothes, possibly to cover up those bruises. They lose interest in activities that they once loved, and they could also blame themselves for how their partner is acting. Those are just some of the red flags. There are hotlines that you can call, either locally or nationally, if you think someone you love is facing violence or abuse. You have to have that conversation and get help. Thank you for joining me here on Mom Squad. We'll see you right back here next week.